following podcast contains mature language and spoilers. Listener discretion is advised.
The Marvel superheroes have arrived! Captain America!
Fantastic Four!
Hulk! Spider-Man! Iron Man!
Spider-Woman!
The God of Thunder!
The crossover palooza it'll inject something. You got that Green Lantern that's is that 3 or 4 issues. That's all Rick Leonardi, just so you steal your nerves.
Right. Plus it's Ron Mars, who's a perfectly functional writer. I don't hate Ron Mars. He's very perfunctory and complies with my expectations from a story. So I know he won't make me mad, at least.
Is it weird that he was, I don't even know if this is correct, but I had the impression in the 90s that he was like a protege of Jim Starlin. And maybe just because he followed him on the Silver Surfer, or he was, there when those Infinity crossovers happened.
No, you're absolutely correct. He was a protege to Jim Starlin, similar to like some of these other people who came up, like, was it Fiona Avery? No, not Fiona Avery. Who was the one, Sam something, that had worked under Straczynski, and he was working with her and trying to set her up with some stuff.
I think it wasn't a Fiona Avery.
No, it wasn't Fiona Avery. It was Sam something. Because Fiona Avery, I think, is an African American woman who did her own thing. If she was anybody's protege, I don't think it was Straczynski's. I think it was somebody else. But anyway, yeah, Mars had worked. I don't know if he was like a assistant to him for a period of time, but they had a working relationships in which he was in some way a subordinate or a protege or mentee, whatever you want to call it. And he helped Mars come in and take over for him when he was leaving Silver Surfer, and basically helped him get set up and was there to help him in the early days of his writing. And they've maintained that relationship. Ron Mars was involved with Ominous Press, who were the people who were initially publishing stuff for Starlin when he started bringing Dreadstar back. And they still collaborate on some of that stuff. Although Starlin has since gone off with other publishers because there were issues with Ominous, but that connection is held for decades. So they're still friendly and professionally collaborative.
Dang, I didn't know any of that later stuff. I was going to say it's weird that I don't associate him with Starlin at all, really. I mean, I think about like Kyle Rayner, what else? Captain Marvel's kid, Marvel, what's his name? Legacy, that guy, Genus Vel. I don't know why are we even talking about? Oh, because he wrote that Alien. Yeah, he did the Green Lantern, which, I mean, I don't think that's bad. Maybe you won't hate that one. Maybe you will hate it.
You never underestimate my ability to detest something. But what gets me too, just somewhat topical right now, is that besides Ron Mars often running in those same circles with Starlin, was Peter David, who took over Dreadstar, who revitalized the Genus Vel character. And as much as Starlin keeps reprinting his own material and has comprehensively collected his work, he never carries on to the Peter David material. And it really bothered me there in recent years, because I realized that some of this is just the realities of publishing and the fact that monies would have to change hands, that maybe Starlin was willing to take a certain rate to get his work out there, but he's not willing to cut into that to have Peter David's work reprinted. But given Peter David's health issues, it would have been really nice if he'd had that revenue stream before he died. And now that he is dead and everybody's all busted up about it and looking out for new Peter David or wanting to go back into their collections and find the Peter David material that they fell in love with, it'd be really nice if somebody would get something like that Dreadstar material out so that people would have access to that as well.
Yeah, that would be something. I feel like I've got most of the Dreadstar stuff, the Starlin Dreadstar stuff covered, not chronologically. I've never sat down and read it all, but every time an issue turns up, it's when I know I already have. The Peter David stuff is completely a blind spot. I probably have 5 issues of that, and they're not consecutive. I have a very, very loose grasp on that, and I would love to read all that in one place. That would be killer.
I bought the Bravura miniseries with Ernie Colon, and I didn't care for it in that first reading. It was too far removed from just the fact that it wasn't even about Advanced Dreadstar. It was about a daughter that I'd never heard of, and it was a time jump and all this kind of gut stuff. So I wasn't really keen on that material. But like Dreadstar was dying by the time Jim Starlin was leaving it. The Luke McDonnell run and the depressive tone had really turned a lot of people off. And then when you had Peter David David and Angel Medina come onto the title, it really revitalized it. And I think there was a very popular book for First Comics. The series did not end until the company collapsed, and the plans were to continue into graphic novels. And it was basically just rights issues and just, demand issues because the market was evolving as First was collapsing anyway, and Starlin had other priorities and such. But I mean, people really liked the Peter David run, and I did not have access to those books when they were coming out. I've since collected most of the run and I've read bits of it. I've always liked Angel Medina, and I think that's some of his best artwork because he wasn't doing so much of the pointy nose stuff at that point. But so people responded well to that material as it was coming out. So there's definitely people from that time period that enjoyed it, and none of it has ever been collected. I don't even think they did a trade collection of the Bravura stuff. If they, I'd be surprised. Maybe they did, but because I think that Malibu got a trade of the first Breed miniseries out, so they'd probably do Dreadstar, and I was poor back then, so I wouldn't have bought a trade just to be a completist. But otherwise, that material had not been in print since late 80s, early 90s when it was originally coming out, and I bet people would want access to that material. I think, especially at this point, there'd be some demand for it. And David's got a widow and children that could benefit from this material, and of course, now you would really shine a spotlight. It's like Peter's gone, but now we're finally getting this material out. It's going to benefit his family. I think it'd be really nice if somebody would get on to that and get that done.
That would be cool. That would be, and it's shameful, but I didn't think about Dreadstar. I mean, I don't have those books, but I didn't think about it at all. I know he did it, but in all the online reminiscing, you hear obviously Hulk, and you hear X Factor, and you hear Aquaman, but it would be great to be able to read those Dreadstar books. That would be good. They're hard to find. I don't ever see them. I buy them when I see them, but
in my area, they're not too tough to find. Especially if you're digging through the dollar bins, you can usually find them. It's finding them in condition and finding the specific numbers you need if you're trying to put together a run. I think I finally completed my run piecemeal, but I haven't read but a chunk of that material. Like I read some of the early stuff when I got a hold of that in like the early 90s, but then I couldn't get any more, and then I've collected it since, but I keep meaning to read the entire run, which means I haven't made it to that point yet to read that any more of that material. But I mean, it looks great, and I know people liked it. Obviously, it was more humorous, but there was always a humorous streak to Dreadstar. Starlin couldn't help himself but to have those little fun issues with like Skeevo and stuff. He liked to take a break and have some fun with that. So it still feels like it's of a piece. And obviously, Peter David was able to do those dark turns in stories. And I know some of that is present in Dreadstar as well. So I'm very curious to finally get around to reading that run. But I know if people liked it when it was coming out, I don't know why they wouldn't like it now. I just think it's a situation where it was coming out before David was really like, I think what really blew Peter David up was the Del Keown run, because a lot of people were thinking more about Todd McFarlane when they were working together. There was more about the art, and also David was still finding his way with that character. I think he really started to hit a stride with the Jeff Purvey, Joe Fixit stuff, but people weren't buying it because Purvey wasn't Todd McFarlane. But then once you got Del Keown, everybody was working at the peak of their abilities, and that's when people really started paying attention to Peter David as a writer, because he'd done all that Spider-Man stuff, and some of it had been well received, but he wasn't like a big name. I mean, he was still having to do like new universe books in that time period, so people really weren't paying attention to him until the early 90s, after he'd already had a good long run on the Hulk, and then he started expanding and doing stuff like when you were talking about these tributes, people kept referencing the Cyber story from Marvel Comics Presents with Sam Keith of all things, and it's like that was
Blood Hunt or whatever that is.
Yeah, I did not think that was as meaningful to people as apparently it was, and I think back too is Illegal Machine was even collecting that material, so even he was buying Wolverine written by Peter David, so that says a lot. I think that's when he had momentum. So it's material that was out of print by the time anybody was paying attention to. So I think that's a big part of the problem. And again, we've come back around again. People are talking about Peter David again. He's on people's minds. Let's get this stuff out there and print already.
That would be very nice. I would skip ahead and buy an omnibus of that ahead of the other ones, just because I've never read, I said it's a complete blind spot.
Well, and it's a good chunk of issues too. I think it's at least a couple of years.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It surprised me how long it went, because even then I knew it was coming out, and I was like, oh man, this thing is still kicking. Yeah, it would be good. He had the stuff he did, I don't know. I was one of those things where I was joking about it, talking to online about how, he changed the way I thought about serial fiction, right? Because in my head, there's an axis, and he's on one end and John Byrne is on the other end. And John Byrne is always going to try to, clean off what he perceives to be barnacles to to get something back to its prototypical pure form. And Peter David is always trying to go the complete opposite direction of that, right? Like if you read like his Hulk run, I'm sure some of that stuff with the editor said, hey, change the Hulk, but the way that character develops over those years and years and years, and the same thing with Aquaman and the same thing with Supergirl, right? It's hard to pin down like this is the pure Matrix Supergirl. Like at what point in that run is that, what Byrne would think is the iconic character, the iconic pure character? Where is that in Supergirl or Hulk or Aquaman? Is it when, I forgot this, is it like Koryak, the guy who he starts to resemble Aquaman? He gets the scales and stuff and his hand gets to be webbed and he's turning into like that, his like bestial ancestor.
I think that was Kordax, because Koryak was his son with the Eskimo lady, and they're both like he was going back to an ancestor thing. And then when you're talking about Matrix Supergirl, at no point in the series was Matrix Supergirl a thing, because from the very first issue he's leaning on the Linda Danvers Earth Angel material. Yeah. But again, that's a situation where the first 50 issues he's playing around with a bunch of transformative stuff with Supergirl, and then he transforms her again into the Timverse version of Supergirl. And the second 2 year, or the next 2 years before this series is canceled, that was a transformation that I don't think worked at all. So it was a two-edged sword. Sometimes he'd come up with transformations that completely blew you away and reinvested you in a character, and then sometimes he'd shake you off. Like I think after Gary Frank left, and you had that period with Liam Sharp and Angel Medina, where it felt like David had lost the script, and part of that was because he'd also had to deal with the whole Heroes Reborn stuff, where he only had half a Hulk and the other half was in another dimension, and just he really kind of lost his way, and he was only finally getting it back on track with the Kubert brother, and then they brush him off and replace him, essentially force him to do stuff he doesn't want to do until he leaves. So again, it was kind of a two-edged sword there. I struggled with his Aquaman stuff because of I think he was too involved with the Atlantis Chronicles stuff, not enough with telling Aquaman stories in the 90s beyond making him as goofily 90s as possible. So there was good to that transformation, there was bad to that transformation.
Yeah. It was I remember, I think it was like 25 or 50 came out, that Aquaman, and I was like, what are they even doing with this? I mean, I liked it, and I was there, and I read it all the way up until Eric Larson took over. But like I was like, Animal Man is in this. Is he going to turn into like a water guy? And then he's turning into like the bestial ancestor, and then he was tried to lean into it seemed like at first they were doing DC universe adjacent stuff, right? Like they had like Deep Six in there, and they had it seemed like they had superhero-y super stuff in the first year or two, and then it went to like political intrigue, and then it went to almost an elemental, and then I think that's what they lost in the book, right? Was it he's like, you want to make him a water elemental, and they're like, no, you can't do that, and then he turns into a waterman in Justice League anyway.
Basically, I think that's the way that it played out. Like I said, none of that really grabbed me. The court intrigue stuff, it didn't really grab me. But you were talking about other like things where he would just like want to go in wildly divergent directions. Scott Lobdell climbed out from under the rock he's been under for the last few years and pointed out that Wolverine losing his adamantium was a Peter David idea. He didn't even get to write that. He never got credit for it, but that was him going, if you want to shock people, why don't you do this? And they all went, yeah, let's do that. So definitely he was always the guy who was trying to find an angle that would shock and offer new story avenues, and there probably isn't enough of that in comic. And certainly there isn't enough writers who could realize that as well as he could if he was writing those ideas. I don't think that Larry Hama was as capable of exploiting that as Peter David would have been.
That's probably fair. Yeah. I mean, I think the difference between Peter David going off and, maybe doing something contrary, or maybe doing something unexpected, or maybe something off the path, I'm not maybe sure I'm going to say this right. It was confrontational, but it wasn't hostile, right? Like he had all those issues of X Factor where it had all this political stuff about like, mutant babies getting aborted, and that it never, partially because it was dressed up in mutants and superheroes, right? But also, it was challenging, but not hostile. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. Like it wasn't like some kind of edgelord. It wasn't like some Mark Miller, Brian Azzarello, let's show Batman's penis type of thing. It was more of a intellectual challenge.
Yeah, it was thoughtful. It was considering the topic. It was classic Star Trek, where you present a conundrum and you have your characters work it out over the course of an episode, and the story revolves around figuring out something that you've thought of as being an important thing to address within that continuity. A lot of that goes back to Jewish thought, to interpretation and responsa, all that stuff from the Talmud. That's just playing devil's advocate, thinking about all the different interpretations, all the different ways in which this problem could be addressed, and coming up with some solutions, or not coming up with a solution and making the reader come up with their own conclusions. That was just part of how he wrote things. And those are the kind of challenges that people like, Rod Serling would present in Twilight Zone. It's like some of it was about trying to get you to an answer, and some of it was about asking you to figure it out for yourself by laying out a bunch of information for you within the context of the story, but allowing you to either come to your own conclusions, or maybe be partially influenced by the story's conclusions. But yeah, that was the problem, is that's what made X Factor good, but that's not what the editors wanted for X Factor. And so they decided to ruin the book instead of letting David just do something a little bit different from what the rest of these guys were doing. They really lost a resource by insisting on constant crossovers and meddling with a writer who did not need to be meddled with.
Yeah, that was tragedy. I was going to say the way it might be that X Factor is relatively short run, but between the art being just killer, I love Larry Stroman and Cressida at the time. It was, I think, a juggernaut. Like those couple issues they worked on together I thought they were great. But X Factor might be one of the books I enjoy the most, considering the art was so great and the stories were so solid, even though it was just that little relatively short run. I thought it was really good. And then I don't know if it's Leonardi again, but Spider-Man 2099 is one of my favorite things that there is. And I was so, maybe I told you this already, but in the 90s, Spider-Man 2099 is coming out. It's my favorite thing. Rick Leonardi is going to be at Motor City Comic Con. I'm going to get a sketch from him, and I'm thinking to myself, Spider-Man 2099 is never going to end. It's going to be like Peter David's going to stay on this like Stan Lee. Rick Leonardi might be replaced by John Romita, but it's going to be great still. And when I get this sketch, in 30, 40 years, when I'm an adult, I'm going to look back at this time, and I'm going to need to have chosen the perfect character. And it can't just be Spider-Man 2099. That's too predictable. That's too boring. Everybody here is doing that. And so I got and paid for a sketch of Vulture 2099, of all dumb things. And so, and now as an adult, I look back and go, why couldn't you have just gotten the Spider-Man 2099 sketch? You idiot. What are you going to do with this Vulture 2099 sketch? I think it's great. It's also Vulture 2099. So what am I doing? Why did I do that?
You're talking to the wrong guy, because the last thing I ever want is the thing that this artist has done 50 bajillion times. I'm sorry, I'm not normal. I don't want to own the 1,573rd Spider-Man 2099 drawing if I can have one of the half dozen Vulture 2099s that are in circulation. If it matters to you, if that's what you wanted, then get what you want. You're not going to take it with you. It's not a stinking investment. If it's a stinking investment, you could probably find better commodities to deal in.
Yeah, no, it's not an investment for sure. I think aside from the story about what an overthinking maniac I was about that whole thing, it was a pretty good artist encounter. He turned the commission around there at the show. Then he took it back. He goes, I forgot to put speed lines. So he did like the speed lines in the background of the thing. It's pretty good. But it is a Vulture 2099 sketch. It's like a biker guy with big metal wings flying around. But I have it. So, but Peter David on Spider-Man 2099, I thought, modern version of Stan Lee. This is never going to end. What could possibly make him stop doing this book? And then of course it's like everything else, not everything else, but a lot of stuff in mainstream superhero comics. When it goes bad, it's because the editor did something wrong or crazy or selfish or stupid or self-important. And then where are you?
Yeah, and that was definitely rots from the head down kind of situation. I think that started with Jim Shooter, but it definitely ramped up once they were on the stock market and had to have quarterly earnings. Everything was the editors trying to figure out how to make these books sell more, and they were the guiding forces. They were the ones who were going to figure out how that was going to get done. And given how many of those guys went on to write deeply mediocre DC comics after they got fired. I think we know who wasn't the creative genius in these relationships.
Yeah. It was. I mean, that was when they made those families, right? Was that?
Yeah,
like
the
families
groups.
of titles?
They looked at the X-Men and said, "This works. Let's do this for everybody." And so they had group editors and families, and then anything that didn't fit into that got thrown into Marvel Edge, including Peter David's Hulk stuff. So
that was-
although at least Marvel Edge was Bobby Chase, so I think that was just a loose collective of anti-heroes as opposed to some editor, trying to run roughshod over the creatives.
Yeah, was Bobby Chase leaving the book what made Peter David leave Hulk finally?
I think it was just constant editorial interference, and also they wanted to force a change they didn't want to make, and he finally just gave up on trying to keep the book. And it's so stupid too, because this was like I don't even know if Bob Harris was around by this point anymore. Well, I guess Harris may have still been there because I don't think that it was in the Quesada period as editor in chief. But yeah, he'd gone through all these terrible times and all these bad decisions, and he'd gone past Heroes Reborn and Heroes Return, and still managed to get screwed over and end up leaving. So you can only tolerate so much. And I think that it's a situation too where maybe he was trying to force a change, and management just decided that they weren't going to budge. He was gone. But it was his choice. It's not like he was fired, but they just kept pushing him until he left. Oh, you know what? It might have been too. That was during that period where that other schmuck, Bill Jemas, might have been involved with that happening too.
Yeah, I think it was something about they wanted just like the Savage Hulk back, because they did a spin-off book. Did they use the title Rampaging Hulk? Because Rick Leonardi, again, he did the first arc on that, I think, and it was supposed to be like a Legends of the Dark Knight type of thing for Hulk, where they could have the Savage Hulk running around in the desert, punching whatever, the Rhino, and then have the Peter David book at the same time. And then they decided, I think it was, they wanted Peter David to do Savage Hulk again, and he's like, why? And then that was it, I think. I met him at Oxford Comics at a signing in Atlanta, and he was pretty nice. It was a store signing, so that's not like a huge con thing, and so you get a chance to kind of shoot the breeze a little bit. And I bought his collected edition of But I Digress, which is pretty fun. I believe he was just getting a divorce because his ex-wife was the editor or something. She was credited on the title page, and he politely crossed out her name and then explained to me why he was doing it. And it was a pretty good interaction. I mean, aside from the divorce, which is a bummer, but
yeah, especially since she came up a lot in his old Comic Buyer's Guide art columns and such. So they had a nice relationship at one time. So it was a bummer to hear that they busted up. But yeah, I saw him at a panel at San Diego Comic-Con in 2000, and then I got to sit at a table and interview him sometime in the 2015-ish or so, I guess. So that was great. It was great to talk to him. He was a blast. He was generous and just an absolute pleasure. And of course, I've loved his work forever, going back to childhood essentially. So that was a thrill. And actually, Max why don't you put that interview back out again? I thought it was kind of ghoulish. She's like, why? We're praising him the entire time, and people want to listen to Peter David talking. It's like, okay, I'll probably get around to it later in the week. I don't know. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, I would listen to it. I don't think I've heard that. And it's not you're not like selling it to anybody. Like, do you want to hear the secret inner thoughts of Peter David?
Right. Yeah. I'm not exactly getting paid for any of this stuff. So
yeah, it'd be just a cool. Yeah, I mean, I would listen to that for sure.
You got started in the sales department at Marvel under Carol Kalish, is that right?
That is correct.
I understand that when you tried to move over from sales to writing, you had a lot of resistance.
Oh, it caused a small uproar because in editorial at the time, the concept was that if you did not work in editorial, you were not creative. Because if you were creative, you would work in editorial. So it's kind of a circular thing. So the notion that a guy from direct sales was interested in writing stories for editorial was absolutely unthinkable. There was great resistance to the idea. After I managed to succeed at it, that resistance went away. A couple of years later, Fabian Nicieza came up to me and told me that he was going to start working in the marketing department, but told me he wanted to do the exact same thing that I had done, which was move over to editorial.
So you basically broke that barrier for other people then?
Yes, absolutely, I did.
Was your main champion moving into the writing Jim Owsley?
Yes, that's correct. Jim Owsley, there's really no other way to say it, was an angry young black man. And the reason that is relevant is because he wore his attitude on his sleeve. At the time, he was the assistant editor for Larry Hama. And if anybody would come into the office and looking for Larry because they needed something, they would say, "Is Larry here?" And Jim would say no, and they'd say, "Okay," and they'd turn around and walk away. If I walked in and I needed something and Larry wasn't there, I'd turn to Jim and say, "Jim, can you help me?" Jim was very thrilled about this. He felt that I was not dismissing him because he was black. I don't think anybody else was either, but that's how Jim perceived it. Anyway, that was Jim's attitude. Now, when Jim was then promoted to editor, and he became the editor of the Spider-Man books, all of a sudden, all the people who had, he felt, no time for him back in the past, suddenly wanted to be his new best friend. Why? Because they all wanted to write Spider-Man. And Jim took, I would say, great pleasure. If I weren't charitable, I would say malicious glee in not having time for any of these people. I walked into his office, I who had gotten nowhere with previous editors when I had pitched ideas to them, and said, "I have an idea for a Spider-Man story." Jim immediately got up, closed his door, sat down, and said, "Hit me." And I pitched an idea for it to him. And he loved the idea, and it turned into Spec Spidey 103. Jim then hired me to do a couple of fill-in issues for Spider-Man. And then he committed the ultimate sin of firing the popular Al Milgrom off of Spec Spidey and giving it over to me. This set up a berserker roar at Marvel because, in those days at least, you did not simply take some no-name new writer and put him on Marvel's flagship character.
How much is it?
And it caused a great deal of ruckus. I'm told that it was actually discussed at various Marvel editorial meetings.
Was it the death of Jean DeWolf that convinced Owsley to keep you as the main writer on the book?
Yes, I think so. Jim wanted to kill off Jean DeWolf. I don't know why. I don't know what Jean ever did to him, but Owsley wanted to kill her off, and he wanted me to write the story. And I went, okay. And what I thought was kind of interesting was that Jean DeWolf had not appeared in a Spider-Man book for a year. When we killed her off, we got deluged with letters from people saying, "Oh no, how can you do that? Jean DeWolf was my favorite character." But I made a point of doing so. I took a few hours and checked over every single letter that we had gotten to Spider-Man for the previous year, and we did not receive a single letter saying, "Where the hell is Jean DeWolf? Why have we not seen anything of Jean DeWolf?" If J. Jonah Jameson disappeared from the comic book for a year without explanation, or Mary Jane or whatever, we'd have heard about it. Jean DeWolf, nobody.
Speaking from personal experience, I read the book sporadically when Al Milgrom was doing it, and one of the other titles when, I think it was Michelini and John Romita Jr., and I remember seeing her, this Commissioner Gordon-type character in a beret, and she didn't resonate with me, but when I bought your first issue of Spectacular as the ongoing writer, and I saw that graphic scene of her demise, it shocked me. I'd never seen something like that in comics before as a young person. That character meant something to me after she died. She never meant anything to me before.
Ah, okay, well, I can believe that. But still, it was just funny to see all this attachment and devotion to her after I killed her off. But you can't really predict what the fan attitudes are going to be.
It seemed to me that one of your first major collaborators in comics was Mark Beecham. Is that about right?
Mark was early on. He did a couple of Spec Spidey Giants. That was, he did a bit. He did those two specials. I think he may have done an issue of Web of Spider-Man, or maybe it was Spec Spidey. But we did a few things together, not a ton of stuff.
You were going to do Sax and Violence together initially, though, right?
No.
No, I thought he did some design for you.
Initially.
Yeah.
I approached Beecham about it. I approached a couple of people about it, and then I wound up with George Perez, which, was perfect.
Now, that was after Future Imperfect, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Now, I assume that Jim Owsley was looking for people to do work on New Universe, and that's how you ended up on Mark Hazzard Merc. Is that right?
Yeah, well, pretty much. He actually had somebody else scheduled to do Mark Hazzard Merc, and now I'm blanking on his name, which is kind of embarrassing. He was originally going to have Larry Hama do it, and then Larry begged off, and he came to me, which was probably a misfit. I did the best I could with Mark Hazzard Merc, but doing the story, about a mercenary, it really wasn't my usual cup of tea. So, I did okay with it, but it wasn't my best work.
Again, I wasn't following writers at that point in time. Just on the sheer quality of work, I very much enjoyed the book. And I noticed about halfway through, I started a lot of interest, and I realized years later it's because you'd stopped writing it. I was reading some Amazing Heroes, but they're talking...
I think Doug Murray took over after.
That's correct. And what was funny is I was reading some Amazing Heroes, and Owsley was pitching the book to that magazine, explaining that you were going to get more into the personal life and the dynamics there. And then once the book switched over to Larry Hama as editor, the big sell was, we've got Doug Murray, and we're going to be doing more correct mercenary-style action. But I wasn't very interested in that, personally.
Well, it really wasn't my thing either. I was much more leaning toward the characterization than having him get into the big mercenary adventures. I mean, my favorite story was him and his kids' baseball team, baseball game.
Yeah, very striking, memorable image, that one.
Oh, thank you.
Did you get to collaborate very much with Gray Morrow, or was it just that he got your scripts?
No, he got the scripts. I mean, that was pretty much it.
You went over to Hulk right around the time you were leaving Mark Hazzard Merc. Was that a desirable assignment, or was it a situation where nobody else wanted it and you wanted the work?
The latter.
Yeah.
Bob Harris came into my office and, understand that I'd been fired off of Spider-Man at that point, primarily because Owsley was trying to keep his job. So I had pretty much no assignments at that point. And Bob Harris came in and asked if I would be interested in writing The Incredible Hulk. And he said, it's not, and he said, have you been reading it lately? And I said, well, no. And he said, well, pretty much nobody had. And he told me that they've switched over the Hulk, so he's now the Gray Hulk. And Rick Jones is the Green Hulk. And my attitude was, why in God's name is Rick Jones the Hulk? Rick Jones should be the everyman. Rick Jones is the absolute last person who should become a Marvel superhero, which is kind of entertaining considering he's now a Marvel superhero, but go figure. But Bob said to me I could pretty much do whatever I wanted to on the title. If I want to get rid of the green Rick Jones Hulk, I could do so. And I said, I absolutely do. And he said, and you can change the Gray Hulk back to green. And I said, well, why would I want to do that? Because at this point, the Gray Hulk is intelligent. And having an intelligent Hulk who can talk like a person is going to be much greater to my strengths, because even then I knew that my best strength in terms of writing comic books was dialogue. And having the Hulk be the monosyllabic Hulk smash Hulk really didn't cater to my strengths. So I decided to keep the Gray Hulk. I got rid of the green Rick Jones Hulk. And basically I committed to doing 6 issues, because I really had no freaking clue what I was going to do with the Hulk. Absolutely no idea. And I was doing up on reading. I was reading stuff, psychology texts. And I wound up reading about multiple personality disorder. And I realized, based upon a story that Bill Mantlo had written about Bruce Banner's youth, that the Hulk suffered from multiple personality disorder, which explained for the first time why Bruce Banner had never been able to cure himself of being the Hulk. He had always approached it from the point of view of the gamma radiation. But the problem wasn't the gamma radiation. The problem was that inside him, Bruce Banner had multiple personality disorder. And he would have had MPD whether he was hit by the gamma rays or not. It turned out that the gamma radiation aggravated the already existing problem, but it did not cause it. That's why his cure attempts had never worked, because all of his cure attempts addressed the gamma radiation, not what was going on inside his head. And I realized that if he really wanted to cure the Hulk, cure himself of being the Hulk, we would do with him eventually what was traditionally done in the case of MPD, which was have hypnosis, where you merge all the personalities to create one fused individual. And I thought that would be really interesting, because he's still going to be big and green because he was hit by gamma radiation. But his personality will be a fully integrated Bruce Banner, which we have never seen in all the decades that this character has been around. And that gave me the overall view for my first 4 years of The Incredible Hulk, and the series just kind of went from there.
It also made for a great application for Leonard Sampson after he'd already been around for a while. You found a whole new and very vital use for him, and it worked out great on X Factor as well.
Yeah, and not only that, it enabled me to use the Ringmaster, because if you're going to have hypnosis in the Marvel Universe, you're going to want to use the Ringmaster. So it all was really very entertaining the way it all worked out.
After you left Mark Hazzard, you went back into the New Universe for Justice. What prompted you to jump onto a New Universe book, especially once things were starting to take on water already?
No, number one, they asked me. And number two, they were interested in completely changing the concept of justice. I was really not interested in writing a story about an other dimensional warrior. But they said, we want to take away the whole other dimensional thing. We want to have him be a normal Earthman who has these powers. And that sounded really intriguing to me. And I said, well, what did you have in mind? They said, write whatever you want. And I worked up Tenson's entire backstory and the way that his powers were going to work and that whole thing. And I just had a field day writing the New Justice. I mean, I think I did it for like 16 issues or something like that. And I had a really good time.
You were actually one of the last books in that line, if I recall correctly.
Yes.
My understanding is that Jim Owsley gave you a rough time when you were getting started out in writing, and I've read in the past that a lot of that was from Jim Shooter. Jim Shooter was giving him heat about you, so he was giving you heat. Did things get better for you at Marvel because Jim Shooter was gone, or was it just a different environment altogether once you became a recognized writer?
Okay, well, first off, I want to say that Owsley remembers him being very, very difficult on me. I honestly don't remember it that way at all. I mean, was he being an editor? Sure, but that was his job. And he may have felt that he was being brutally difficult with me, but I sure didn't see it that way at all. So whatever he has inflated in his mind about, the torture that he put me through as I was writing Spider-Man is, to my mind, really his own invention. I did not get that at all. In terms of the view of me as a writer, part of that, I think, stemmed from the fact that the editors became convinced that even though I was writing the book, I was writing for comic books, I was not using my position as sales manager to inflate my own sales. That was something that they were worried about. It was completely baseless, but they started to realize that, okay, number one, holy crap, this guy really can write. And number two, he's not abusing his power as direct sales manager to benefit from it. I think that people started to relax. It may very well be because Shooter was fired, or it may just be that it may have been the same thing that gay marriage is perceiving now. I mean, 20 years ago, gay marriage was unthinkable. Now, 37 states have okayed it, and pretty much in June, the Supreme Court's going to okay it too.
And the whole nation of Ireland this weekend.
Yeah, the whole freaking most Catholic nation of Ireland, said by 70%. Yeah, sure, fine, whatever. When you introduce something that people say is going to end the world, and then the world just keeps right on turning, completely oblivious to it, people tend to go, oh, okay, well, this actually isn't so bad, and then they just stop objecting to it. So I don't know if it was the timing of Shooter's leaving, or people just got adjusted to the fact that I was writing for Marvel Comics, and the world was still turning.
You broke into DC doing work on their licensed books like Star Trek and The Phantom. How did that happen? I
asked them. Basically, I was exploring the idea of becoming a full-time writer. So I got together with Bob. I contacted Bob Greenberger, who's a friend of mine, still is. And I was still at that point an employee with Marvel Comics. So I basically said to him, I need to ask you a judicious question. If I were a full-time freelance writer, would there be work for me at DC? I could not ask him for an assignment at that point because it would be a conflict of interest. I was still a Marvel employee. He could not offer me anything because I could not take it because I was a Marvel employee. I said to him, if I became a full-time writer, would there be work for me? And he said, absolutely, there would be work for you. So at that point, on Bob's, promise, I went to Marvel Comics and I said, okay, I'm quitting to become a full-time writer. At which point I then got together with Bob and a couple of editors at DC for lunch, and they offered me the Phantom first, as I recall, and then they offered me Star Trek. So yeah, and it went fine.
Given that you're writing the Phantom again, I assume you have some affinity for the character?
It would seem so, yeah, apparently. I mean, I've been saying for years that my dream project was to do the Phantom meets Tarzan. And once I was given this assignment, I said, oh my God, now I can finally do the Phantom meets Tarzan, which I would have been happy to do if Edgar Rice Burroughs' estate hadn't been dicks. So I'm writing the exact same story I would have written anyway, except I have my own version of Tarzan.
Your first mainstream work at DC inside the core continuity was Secret Origins for the Justice League of America. How did you come to write that? Because my understanding is the original creative team was going to be the same as the 1989 Aquaman series, with Bob Fleming doing the script and Kurt Swan doing the art.
Okay, you're asking me to cast my mind back 30 years. As I recall, I didn't write that. I scripted over an existing story. And I guess what happened is that the assigned writer simply either didn't have the time or flaked out or whatever, and they asked me to write it. And I said, okay, sure. But I really didn't think about anything much beyond that. I mean, I'd love to tell you there's some sexy story behind that, but there's really not. It was like, hey, Peter, we have this book. Can you script it? Okay, sure. That's it. The whole story.
Given that you were already building a reputation as a comedy writer and you had Justice League International going at that time, I just read the script again last night. It was quite funny. Did anybody ever approach you about maybe taking over that book once Giffen and Matisse were leaving? Because you just seem like a perfect fit.
That's a great question. No.
Had you previously read the Steve Englehart story, Justice League -1, where there was a retelling of the origin of the Justice League that was like a secret origin based in the 1950s?
Not that I recall, no.
You worked on Atlantis Chronicles with Esteban Maroto.
I did.
A great experience?
Oh, it was fantastic. I loved writing Atlantis Chronicles. I had so much fun with that series. And what's really killer is that I was at a DC Christmas party or something like that, and Jeanette Kahn and Paul Levitz were raving to me about Atlantis Chronicles because they loved how it was turning out. And Jeanette said to me, we are going to give this book the Watchmen treatment. We are going to collect this as a trade paperback. We're going to put out merchandise. We're going to make sure that everybody loves this comic book, which they then proceeded to do nothing with. Atlantis Chronicles remains uncollected some 30 years later, which royally pisses me off.
And why did it take so long for you to end up on Aquaman? It was such a huge gap between that miniseries and you're finally taking over the Aquaman book.
There was initially resistance because the editor of the series completely misread issue 7 of the Atlantis Chronicles and thought that I was portraying Aquaman's birth as an immaculate conception, and that I was basically putting forward the notion that Arthur was a Jesus figure, which wasn't anything that he was interested in. However, the guy who was writing the Aquaman series before I was, apparently wasn't writing anything that was very popular, and people weren't interested in reading it. And someone at DC said to him, for God's sake, go talk to Peter David. And I went out to lunch with him, and he told me about his concerns. And I immediately said, no, it wasn't an immaculate conception. Atlan the wizard was there. He had sex with her, and that's where Aquaman came from. I said, I'm Jewish. It doesn't really occur to me to write Jesus Christ references into my books. It's not really part of who I am as a writer. And that immediately eased up the editor, and he felt number one, I think he felt badly that he had come to that conclusion. And number two, he felt much more relaxed then about the prospect of my coming onto Aquaman. And so I then started the series with doing a 4-part Time and Tide, and then from there went into the ongoing Aquaman series, and I had a lot of fun with it.
It occurs to me because we're talking about how you've got these cultural differences that kind of alter perceptions.
Yeah.
In the case of the Valley of the Dolls story from Justice League Task Force, it's interesting because back in the early 90s when I read the story for the first time, it was just the comedy of the discomfort of John Jones.
Yeah.
All these years later, there's an element of transphobia to John Jones, but at the end he resolves it, and so it still plays today. It just plays a little bit differently with a little bit of a different culture context.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's pretty much right. I mean, I always try to put subtext into my stories for the readers to garner stuff from it that they might not get on the first reading.
So was that actually intentional at the time, though, or was it something that came up over the course of the decades that followed?
Was what? I didn't hear.
The on the Valley of the Dolls story, where John's kind of dealing with his issues with her who must be served. Was that something you intended at the time, or is that something that's like the subtext came into really?
No, that's I intended that at the time.
Very good. Now, you were one of the earliest and most vocal critics of Image Comics. So you had the whole name withheld, Eric Larson, kerfuffle.
Yeah.
You had the debate with Todd McFarlane. Now, in the years since, Image has kind of grown up and become a company that's pretty well regarded in terms of how they deal with creators and the opportunities presented there. How do you feel about Image Comics today?
I felt about Image Comics back then exactly the same way I felt about every other comic book company, which was if they said something stupid, I commented on it. All I did was hold them to the same level that I held Marvel and DC and Archie and whoever else. And they put out some initial press releases and commentaries that I thought were monumentally stupidly written. It was really no more involved than that. And Image went totally batshit crazy because they were some... Hey, Barry. Hi there. She loves her underwear.
Want to buy another pair?
I saw those underwear. She got those underwear?
Yeah, I
awesome.
Oh, they're spectacular.
I'm not getting in the way of you, Barry Boswick.
Barry, can I take a picture with him?
Yeah.
Oh, excellent.
Great panel yesterday, by the way. I was having a lot of fun with that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, we had a good time. We always have a good time.
So the best job I've ever had at a con is to sell Barry Boswick's underwear.
Boy, were you grinning. Okay,
You
go
were at
ahead.
Spin City too, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've seen Rocky Horror many a time.
Oh yeah. But just the Spin City connection too, though. Okay, sorry, I lost my place. Let's see. Oh, Image.
Yeah, so they went totally nuts because I guess they were expecting uniform support from everybody. And all I did was comment on things that turned out to be utterly prescient. I said that having 7 different spokesmen was a recipe for disaster, and they should pick one of them to be the spokesman, which they eventually did. I also said that, 7 guys teaming up for business, you really should have your lawyers look over your contracts, because sooner or later, you guys are going to have a falling out, which they eventually did with Rob Liefeld. So, everything that I said about Image turned out to be 100% correct. A little factoid that they still don't like to think about even decades later. But I didn't have any issue with the notion that they wanted to go off and do their own stuff. I just questioned the way they phrased it. When they said, in many ways, we've been holding back, I'm going, and that means what? What are you talking about? What do you mean holding back? You mean you haven't been giving your best work up till now? And which obviously isn't what they meant, but that's what they said. So I was interested in what they said. So now, they seem to have settled in, and they have a business model that they've managed to make work for them. Remember, they were originally being distributed by Malibu. I said, yeah, that's going to last. Yeah. Which, of course, and they got outraged over that. And then a year later, Malibu was, so the bottom line is I was right about everything. The fact that they have continued to prosper since then is excellent. And I think a nice commentary on the business of comic books. But I really don't give much thought to them beyond that.
Getting back to your gift for prognostication, you called years ago that Amanda Conner was going to become a superstar, and she did.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know if anything's ever going to be done with Soul Searchers and Company?
I have absolutely no idea. The person asked about that would be Richard Howell.
And do you have any creator-owned work coming up that hasn't been announced yet?
I have novels that I'm working on. I don't have any creator-owned comic books, definitely. although I might be.
Also, in that Justice League story, you had a great handling of Wonder Woman. Did you ever get approached for that character, or did you ever consider writing Wonder Woman?
Great question. No.
I'm sensing a theme appearing here.
Yeah, really.
Almost done.
Okay.
Okay, now we're going to get into the heavy-duty nerd Martian Manhunter stuff real quick. Okay. So in Aquaman number 14, you had a Justice League team approach Aquaman after Thanatos impersonated him and started a war with the surface world. It was sort of a piecemeal team from various Justice League groupings, and one of the main ones was Martian Manhunter, who got the napalm hand from the actual Aquaman. I was just curious, did John Jones appear in that story for any reason other than because the fire weakness made him an easy target?
I have no recollection at all. I don't even remember writing the story until you just asked me. I mean, because, like, dude, that was, 25 years ago?
Right.
How much do you remember what you did 20... Actually, you might remember a lot. But, I mean, I barely remember stuff that I wrote 25 days ago, much less a quarter of a century.
You also had the Martian Manhunter appear in a rare solo guest appearance in Aquaman 28, where he helped the Aquaman to get onto the floating Atlantis planetoid thing.
That's right.
Was that another instance where Martian Manhunter was just a practical choice, or did you choose him for any other reason?
I don't remember.
It was
I won't tell you about the giant floating head, because this is funny. This is really funny. When I wrote Atlantis Chronicles, I wrote it full script. And the script was translated for Esteban Maroto, who only speaks Spanish, by his daughter. So in the first issue, I decided to have it be that the reason Atlantis sank was because of a meteor strike, which a number of Atlantean scholars believe is what happened. So I described that the meteor was drawing closer and closer. And at one point, around page 30, I said, panel 1, the meteor has drawn closer, and for the first time, we can now see the face of the meteor, its craggy surface and exterior. Now, when I said face, I meant front, surface. We got the pages back, and to my astonishment, Esteban Maroto had drawn a death's head skull face onto the meteor. And I'm looking at him going, holy crap, there's an actual face. And the closer it got, the more clear it was that this giant death's head skull is coming at you. And Bob Greenberger, who was my editor on it, said, do you want me to have art corrections? Change it. And I looked at it and I said, no, you know what? I like it. And this was my reasoning. If a meteor is coming toward you, and it's an ordinary meteor, you might have hope that you're going to survive. If a meteor is coming towards you and it has a giant death's head skull, you're done. That's it. Don't read any continued stories. You're going to pack it in, because if the death's head skull is coming at you, your ticket's going to get punched. And so we left the death's head skull in there. And I wound up thinking, there should really be some freaking reason that a meteor with a death's head skull is coming at them. And I wound up then developing the entire storyline in Aquaman that explained that it was not a meteor but a gigantic spaceship, which made sense to me. So that was I don't remember why in God's name the Martian Manhunter was in there, but I do remember the entire origin of the face.
Happy accidents can yield some pretty great stories.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I just thought that was hysterical that Esteban drew the skull face on there, and I wound up sticking with that.
You used the Despero character in an issue of Supergirl and an issue of Young Justice. Do you have an enjoyment of that character that you wanted to keep using him?
Yeah, well, basically I think he's got a great visual. I think that Despero really looks freaking cool. So I decided to use him for a couple of issues.
Excellent. And this is the 60th anniversary of the Martian Manhunter. Do you have any thoughts on the character? Mm-hmm.
I have no thoughts on the character because I didn't know it was the 60th anniversary, aside from the fact that, oh my God, this character's been around for 60 years. Not bad for someone who you can basically take out by striking a match.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, sir. It's been an honor and a blessing to speak with you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
he might be the first writer that I've noticed and followed, like it would have been because of the Hulk. But yeah, I mean, I was there for his Spider-Man stuff, and I wasn't collecting Spider-Man at that point, but I started buying Hulk, I think with the X Factor crossover, I believe. And so I've got all those McFarlane issues. But yeah, man, I thought he was great.
Yeah, it was a similar situation with me where I started buying his Hulk regularly during the Del Keown run, and then retroactively realized, oh wait, this is the guy who wrote the run of Spectacular Spider-Man when I was collecting that book. He wrote the early issues of Mark Hazzard Merc, which made me a fan of that character. I kept coming across all this stuff with his name after the fact and not realizing, oh, I've actually been enjoying this guy for years, and I just didn't know it because I wasn't paying attention to writers back then.
Yeah. He's good. I mean, it's a bummer to see relatively young, right?
I want to say he was late 60s. I think I remember reading 68.
Yeah, that's relatively young. I mean, I'm not, it's not tomorrow or the next day, but it's right around the corner. I guess I should be so lucky to be 68. But.
Yeah, he was closer to my father's age, and my father was young when they had me. Yeah, it's old enough to be my father, but my father wasn't that old, so yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when somebody's 20 years older than you, when you're 10, that's a big deal. When you're 20, kind of a big deal. If you're 50, maybe less of a big deal. I don't know. I sure did like it. I appreciate his writing. And I was going to say, this is what I meant to say with his continuously changing characters. That was something I actually noticed pretty early on. And then when there was like those letters column feuds made with Byrne and Eric Larson, it kind of made me realize, there's guys who don't want these things to change, and there's guys who want them to continually change. And I've been reading comic books my whole life, and a lot of the ways I think about things are through models I've kind of built up through comic books. And I was joking when I said it, but it was one of those like Royal Tenenbaum things where as soon as I said it, I realized it was true, is that he changed the way I think about living, right? Because, the Hulk didn't stay the same. Aquaman didn't stay the same. Supergirl didn't stay the same. They're always changing, right? And that's more, I don't know if I ever gave you the rant about how I don't like realistic comics, but that's more realistic than having these fixed, unchanging paper doll characters, right? And it kind of, even as a teenager, it kind of set that in my mind that life is dynamic and that people change and situations change. And there is something to be said for Peter Parker, this photographer, trying to pay his rent and get back to Aunt May's wheat cakes, whatever. But there's also something to be said for, character development and stories that end. And that's the kind of stuff that he would deliver. And it's stuff that you wouldn't get in certainly not every other superhero comic, and not most other superhero comics. It was, he really did, he changed the way I think, and I think he changed my life.
Well, he was the first creator I ever interviewed. I was just checking to make sure I thought that was the case, and it was true, and it took a while to screw up the nerve, and Mac was there with me, and he didn't think I was going to be able to go through with it. He was really impressed when I did. And obviously I loved his work. He was one of my first favorite writers, one of the first writers I followed, and definitely informed what I think a good story is. But I also think that there are characters that are more conservative and characters that are more liberal in how you approach them. And you look at somebody like the Hulk, it's a character who's grounded in transformation, so he has to change or else it becomes stale. I think Peter Parker is somebody who needs to have constant shakeups and constant melodrama and tumult, and so it makes sense to have somebody like him for that character. I think Supergirl's a character that always struggled to get past the niche of Superman but make it girl, and I think that he did a really great job with that in his run and showed that character could be, something more than just Superman with a pink triangle, and a pink diamond instead of a red one. Whereas there are other characters that Aquaman, I never really felt like he had the grasp of the character that I wanted him to have. I never thought that he reflected the things about the character that I liked, and I thought that he almost highlighted the things I disliked. I wouldn't have wanted to really see him do a run on Superman as a, for instance, or Captain America, maybe Captain America, because I think that he would have really leaned into the ideology and the contrast between ideals and reality and pragmatism. So that could have been interesting. I could see that working, but I wouldn't want him to fundamentally change Steve Rogers. I would want him to put Steve Rogers in situations where he was conflicted, and that's definitely an aspect of the character, is being conflicted by a world that's not his own, being pulled out of time and faced with questions that he didn't have to ask himself earlier in his life because he had come from a more simple world, a more grounded world, a more familial world. So there's some characters I think he worked on. I think there's some characters that are made to be broken and some characters that need to be somewhat fixed. And I think David was definitely better with characters that are somewhat innately broken and need that sort of transformative approach. But I also respected too that as bold as he could be, I do think that when he wrote a character, for the most part, he did find enough of a core of that character to where he wouldn't incense the audience, to where that he was honoring what had come before. He respected the continuity. He respected the lore. He was, like he said, he wasn't some kind of shock jock kind of person, but he was somebody who was going to challenge the character and make the character go to places they wouldn't necessarily have naturally gotten to on their own. And I think that daring worked really well with some characters. And I think he upped the game of comics writing in general because he showed people how to, again, honor the past, but also progress the concept and make the concepts relevant for modern audiences.
Yeah, I agree. I would have liked to see him do a Captain America, actually, because, considering how he played X Factor, and then it was a Gary Frank issue of Hulk that had Captain America in it, and Captain America was sent, Nick Fury or somebody, the president sent him to stop the Hulk from doing X, and I don't really remember anything. I remember the cover, the Gary Frank art, and then there's a line in there to the effect of, Captain America says, Bruce, you can't do this. This is against the law. And he says, there's what's legal and there's what's right. And that was it. And you're like, oh man, the Hulk is going to beat up Captain America. But yeah, stuff like that. I mean, I think it would have been very compelling to see him do an extended run on Captain America if he could take that, like that whole thing we're talking about, like how you could examine these current events, hold it up, look at the different facets of it. I think that would have been pretty cool to see him do Captain America.
Well, and I remember really liking Gary Frank's Cap in that issue, and for his cleaner, more Alan Davis indebted style of that time period. So that would have been a really cool combination, having David and Frank move on to Captain America from Incredible Hulk. But also, not that was going to happen in that time period in any way, shape, or form. I think Grunwald was probably still writing the character then. But another one was that I've always thought that Norm Brayfogle did a great job on the character of all things, the prime Captain America one-shot crossover. So having him with David on a run of Cap would have also been pretty sweet.
Yeah, that would have been cool. I don't know. He's one of those guys, Brayfogle, where like I look back now and I'm like, why didn't I see then what I see now? Because it looks really good now. Even that Prime stuff, I picked up a bunch of Ultraverse stuff lately just to amuse myself, I guess. And he's good. He's talented. That would have been cool to see him do. Yeah. Oh well, shoot. Yeah, I should go back and read his Spider-Man stuff.
Yeah, I'm definitely thinking about runs to go back and read. I feel like Fix would probably like to do something with the Hulk stuff, and that's something we've never really gotten around to. So I would like to go back and read some of that stuff too. And I picked up the Captain Marvel Omnibus, and I've only read bits and pieces of that. That looked like a really cool run of books. I just never. It was in the time period where I was very much over Marvel, and I was a little bit over Peter David in that time period as well. So I didn't follow him onto that title. But in the years since, I've regretted it because I really thought a lot of cool stuff was happening in that book when I'd tossed through it. So that's why I went ahead and invested in the omnibus. So that's another thing that I could go around to read. But yeah, I would be surprised if we don't end up doing something with Peter David in the near future, because with him gone, it really makes you want to spend time with him through the text, through the stories.
Yeah, and it's these huge runs, right? I mean, until he got chased off or excused by whatever editorial shenanigans halftime, he has massive runs. Very prolific and just like an endless font of narrative. Just all kinds of stuff. That X Factor Hulk crossover, the second one, not the X-Terminator's X Factor with the Gray Hulk, but the Keown one. That was really something. Yeah, that was good. I remember reading a Comic Shop News, and they were talking about how the same way people say Neil Adams Batman and Walt Simonson Thor, people are going to say Peter David and Keown's Hulk. They do, I think, right? Like that's like a classic run.
Yeah, I think that's inarguable. Like, that was one of those super hot books of the 90s. That was a real a benchmark for a lot of people as to what was great comics. There's a lot of people who had abusive childhoods that relate strongly to a lot of the work that, especially during the Leonard Sampson psychological stuff that he was doing, which predated and anticipated that one X Factor issue that everybody adores. That was like a critical flashpoint. Like, again, people enjoyed the Todd McFarlane stuff. That helped to rise Todd McFarlane to being a hot artist. But the stuff that people really seem to embrace is that Keown period. And I do think that was some of his best writing in comics. And again, having spent so many years on that run, he had really invested and had just gone from strength to strength up to that point.
Yeah, and it was because I had Marvel Unlimited, and I went through this was like earlier this year, all the stuff all the issues of Hulk that I didn't have. I basically got sick of trying to fill in the gaps, so I'm just going to read all these, and they're not. I don't know if it's like this a synergy. I feel like he does did a lot of script heavy stuff, but maybe not. I don't know. Whatever it is with Liam Sharp, I like Liam Sharp a lot, but that run, that's not like the Keown run. It's it's something totally different. I love Angel Medina, and that's better, but it's still not the same type of thing. I don't know, that Keown run, especially. I mean, the way, I don't know, everything about that run, that whole thing with like the little bit, like there's like 2 issues where the Defenders are in it, and it was seeing that artwork was a lot like seeing McFarlane do characters in Amazing Spider-Man. Like McFarlane's drawing like Killer Shrike, right? Like Killer Shrike, who cares? But if you're a certain age and you're looking at this McFarlane drawing of Killer Shrike, you're like, oh man, is this the coolest guy in the Marvel Handbook, or the Prowler? This guy's pretty great. Look at the Prowler. I didn't know he was incredible. It's the same kind of thing as like Keown would draw the Super Skrull. Like, oh man, I don't know if I've ever noticed how cool the Super Skrull is. This is pretty great. Or but then the other thing I liked is he didn't draw everybody in that John Buscema 8.5 heads tall type of thing. Like when he drew Havoc standing next to the Hulk, the Havoc was just like a dude, right? In a cool jacket. The Doctor Strange just looked like a guy with a cape, and it was very striking, and it made the whole thing really stand out because people look like people, not superheroes posing. Yeah, it's pretty good stuff.
Yeah, sorry, nothing to add. Are we running out of gas? It sounds like we're running out of gas.
Running out of gas.
Okay.
I looked down on my phone like, oh, it's midnight.
Yeah, it's late. I couldn't figure out where to put this. Could have been a DC special. I figured it still felt mostly like a Marvel superhero, so that's where it landed. In case you're wondering, Barry Bostwick from the Rocky Horror Picture Show makes a brief cameo. I'd pulled the original audio first draft edit from when I did the first episode of the Amazing Heroes Interviews podcast, which is where that Peter David material came from. And while we were talking, Barry Bostwick came up because I believe Peter David's wife, I suppose now widow, had won signed boxers of Barry's related to Rocky Horror at the convention as some sort of a charity thing, I think. There's also some questions about Martian Manhunter that I think I'd recorded for my Idlehead of Diablo podcast and then never got around to using there. So yeah, you got the bonus version apparently. It's a little bit longer. I thought we could spend a little more time with Peter while we had the recording. So Neff Sayers, Keith G. Baker wrote of the Beneath the Spider-Verse podcast where we talked about Morbius, Madam Web, and Kraven the Hunter. So I agree with Frank on all 3 of these movies. I may need to see a doctor. Michael wrote another great one. So for permanent Marvelite Maximus followers, we've got Marvel Star Wars from Empire to Jedi podcast, which is a new one from The Irredeemable Shag. I'm actually listening to the first episode while gathering the social media for this podcast. I'm not a Warsy anymore. I don't know if I'll be back for the second, but I want to at least support him for the first episode, and you guys check that out if you were Warsies. Also, Meth the Land Cat and Nicola Cruikshank. Keepers of the Favorites Flame include GNRJB395. Look, the actual characters are kanji, but this person keeps at least liking our stuff, so I want to acknowledge. Alan Mejia Estrada, Bob at Mega Thumpzilla, David Galler, Derek WC, Gene Hendricks, The Irredeemable Shag, Jarrett Keene, JMT Productions, Julia Raoul, Nick Spence, Paolo Anderson Barbosa, and Siskoid. Retweet frantic ones include Between the Pages blog, David A. Quinley 2, Hicks, Relatively Geeky Podcast Network, and Richard Field, and the Merry Marvel Marching Society, Ed Moore Teal Productions, The Hammer Strikes, Random Geeky Stuff, Keith G. Baker, Michael, and Superbound. I also want to say that I'm on Blue Sky, and there's been a lot of talk lately about Blue Sky supposedly dying, even though what's actually happened is fuckwits would try to pull their bullshit on Blue Sky and would get promptly muted by everybody and then go cry somewhere, and they're the ones who are trying to say that Blue Sky is dying. Most of this list is taken from Twitter. Don't fucking tell me that Twitter isn't fucking dying. There's only a few dozen people acknowledging the tweets in any way. Twitter ain't chewing shit for us anymore. I think people in general are maybe pulling back from social media also because we're living in a goddamn goddamn hellscape, and the less we have that rubbed in our faces, the better, I'm thinking. Oop, I'm not helping. Never mind. Scratch all that. Everything is wonderful.
The Marvel Superheroes podcast is in no way affiliated or endorsed by Marvel Entertainment. All characters mentioned and audio clips employed are believed covered under fair use, but remain copyright their respective copyright holders. But of course, the views expressed are wholly owned by the people who spoke them. No infringement is intended.
All my bookmark stuff, I had like Hellblazer or Hellraiser versus Judge. Oh my God, I can't even talk. Martial Law versus Pinhead.
Oh, Pinhead, yeah. Law and Hell.
Yeah, the second issue of that I don't have.
Yeah, that was that. I had a tough time with that one. It took me a year plus to finally find that dang thing. And that you definitely don't see the twos nearly as much as the ones. Although I don't see either one of them anymore anywhere. Those have dried up and disappeared. It seems like everybody who wanted it grabbed it or grabbed multiple copies. I know Fix is the kind of guy who, if he's going through a dollar bin and he sees something like that, he'll just grab another one just like have them seated throughout his boxes. So if he goes through any given box, he'll eventually come across that one issue when he wants to find it. I think there's maybe some hoarders, but there weren't that many printed in the first place. And especially I don't know why I had such trouble finding it. Both that one and Secret Tribunal 2, but especially Law and Hell, I had just a heck of a time finding.
Yeah, they had it, but it was like $15 or something like that.
Yeah, and because of rights issues, that's not going to get reprinted pretty much ever, probably.
Exactly.
And I don't even know to what degree Kevin O'Neill's passing could have screwed up the rights even further. So, if you want it, you're going to probably have to pay for it.
Yeah, and I figured, on one hand, 10-year-old me is thinking, the most I paid for any comic was $20, I think it was, or $18 for the first appearance of the Hobgoblin in the early 90s. And I thought that was like a fortune. But, there's the new anniversary issue of Wolverine or Spider-Man is going to be $10, $9.99 at least. So why wouldn't I pay something like that for the comic I've been trying to find for 20 years?
Right.
I'm not excited about it, but why not?
Well, look, I'm definitely more discerning. I have more resources than I had back then, but I also have less interest in just any old thing. I'm definitely not chasing after a bunch of different runs, and the stuff I'm looking for in runs is genuinely, tricky stuff and uncommon stuff. The stuff I really want, I've learned I'm just going to have to pay for because it's not easy come,
Right.
I'm just not concerned about completing some stretch of Captain America issues or something. And what they're asking for a lot of that stuff is beyond what I feel like it's worth. So I'm just not going to pay it. But yeah, if it's something you really want, especially if it's something that you've not been able to get a hold of after a long stretch of time, at some point, you just suck it up and pay for it or give it up, one of the two.
Right.
But there is a psychological purge that you have to perform to get that out of your brain and not keep looking for this thing that you've been programmed to look for forever.
Yeah, it is, part of it's that it's expensive, but part of it's also, I guess, that you're giving up, right? Like, what? I'm not going to look for this anymore. I'm just going to have it.
Mm-hmm.
But if they put it back on the website.
And also it is a situation where the pain can help you too, because I've occasionally bought things that I got a pretty good deal on or didn't pay a remarkable amount of money for, then I accidentally buy a second or third one because I'm still thinking, do I need this one? I think I need this one. I'm going to go ahead and buy this one again just in case. And then it's like, crap, here's another one. Where if I have to, if there's financial pain involved, I'm going to remember. I definitely have this one because I paid $25 from this website and then shipping and taxes on top of it. I'm going to remember I bought that sucker.
Right. Yeah, that was when the Milligan Human Target was coming out. I tracked down the first appearance of the Human Target and paid more than any reasonable person would. But I was like, oh, this is going to be my last great back issue because I'm not going to fall in love with more characters. I don't think. Maybe we'll see.